In the spring of 1945, after half a decade of war, death seemed the only victor. 15 million soldiers had lost their lives. At least 20 million civilians had been murdered, more people dead than in any other war in history. And millions more were starving and homeless. The agony in Europe was drawing to a close, but in the jungles of the Pacific, the struggle went on. On April 12th, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, would become one more name in the list of casualties. Into his job stepped Harry Truman. Vice President for just 3 months, Truman now took on the responsibility for ending the war, stemming the slaughter. The day he took office, Truman was told for the first time of a top-secret project. In 1941, American scientists, led by Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer, had convinced President Roosevelt that America should try to develop an atomic bomb. 3.5 years later, work was nearly completed on the most destructive weapon the world had ever known. On July 16, 1945, in the desert near Alamogordo, New Mexico, the first atomic bomb was tested. Exploding with a force of 20,000 tons of TNT, almost twice as much destructive power as anticipated, the bomb contaminated the atmosphere with unknown quantities of nuclear fallout.
Had the bomb. Now, had to make a decision as to whether we'd use that bomb on Japan or not. And that decision was up to me, because I was the President of the United States and we controlled the bomb.
A new trend in Japanese combat tactics would influence Truman's decision. American troops landing on Iwo Jima and Okinawa did not meet Japanese resistance as they hit the beach. Instead, the defenders held back, entrenched in caves, daring the Americans to come to them. The Americans finally took the islands, but at great cost.
In Okinawa, 1 out of every 3 Americans ended up dead, wounded, or missing. And in taking that island, we had to kill 110,000 Japanese, and we lost 12,000 of our own. It gave us some idea of what we had to do in order to defeat the Japanese in the war.
Kamikaze raids, another deadly new tactic. Young Japanese pilots dove their planes in suicidal attacks against the American fleet. In a few months, the kamikazes destroyed 34 American ships, damaged 285 others. Truman called this ominous news.
It was not the fact the Japanese were willing to die and waste themselves in these kamikaze attacks, but they still had 4 million men under arms. It was their intention to keep on fighting just as long as they possibly could in the hope that they'd wear us out.
To fight and die for the glory of the emperor. For the leaders of Japan, living by a medieval samurai code of honor, surrender was an unthinkable end. They were prepared to make their final stand defending the Japanese home islands at whatever cost.
It was something to contemplate. I remember the terrible anxiety through which the people in Washington went, and I was one of them, wondering what would happen when we attempted to take the main islands of Japan. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and I had to help plan the normal invasion. They put that normal in quotation marks. I don't mind telling you that you don't feel normal when you plan to have the Navy ready to evacuate 30,000 wounded in the first 30 days and plan hundreds of thousands of complete final deaths by American boys who are alive while you are doing your planning. I tell you, you break your heart and your head trying to figure out a way to save one life.
Experts predicted the invasion would last 18 months, cost 500,000 lives. As an alternative to invasion, the generals proposed the atomic bomb. The destruction it would cause might bring a Japanese surrender, halting the death toll on both sides. The American Air Force was already causing great suffering in Japan. Massive firebomb raids left industrial areas destroyed, harbors blocked, cities in flames. A single raid over Tokyo took 75,000 lives and left millions homeless.
Firebombs reduced the frail Japanese cities to ashes. They were a horrible thing to do, and they destroyed more towns and more people than any other weapon of war that we used. I had to make the decision as to whether the atom bomb was just another piece of artillery.
Some who had worked on the bomb argued that it was not just another piece of artillery. They believed that radioactive fallout was a weapon of criminal magnitude and should never be used. Others suggested that the bomb could be dropped on an unpopulated Pacific island as a warning to Japan. But Truman disagreed.
We had 3 completed bombs. We had used one for a demonstration in New Mexico. We had 2 bombs left. And we had to be very, very careful on how we used those bombs. If one of them turned out to be a dud when we decided to use it, we would be in a situation where our demonstration wouldn't be worth anything.
Stepping up the firebomb raids for emphasis, Truman tried one last time to pressure the Japanese into giving up. He sent an ultimatum to Tokyo demanding immediate surrender. But he left out specific mention of the nuclear peril ahead if it were not accepted. The firebombs were devastating, but the demand for surrender was ignored. Truman believed he had used up his options. He now gave the order that the atomic bomb be dropped on Japan.
It was my purpose to wind up the war as soon as possible. I believe that no man could fail to use the bomb and afterward look his countrymen in the face. To get ready for the delivery of the bomb, the 509th Composite Group of the 20th Air Force had been practicing for over a year in an isolated desert of Wendover Field. But they didn't know what they were training for. And they were practicing to drop only one bomb, which to them was funnier still.
In July, they were transferred to Tinian, a Pacific island 5 hours by air from Japan, to await final orders.
For many weeks before the bomb was sent to Japan, we sent 3 B-29s over Japan, right along. They flew all around over Japan. The Japanese finally got so they paid no attention to them because they thought they were weather planes. And in that way, we were sure that the bomb would arrive safely over the targets which we intend them to reach. At 2:45 a.m., the Enola Gay cleared the runway on the special bombing mission with 10,000 pounds of atomic bomb called Little Boy aboard.
August 6th, 1945. The pilot of the Enola Gay recalls his historic flight.
After a photographing session that made us feel like a Hollywood premiere, we got off at about 3 o'clock in the morning. We felt that it was our lucky day, and and we knew it was as we made the final approach toward Hiroshima, which the navigator hit right on the button. I could clearly see the city of Hiroshima within my bomb sight. I made the run, let the bomb go, and the explosion occurred as planned.
Hiroshima, a lovely city famous for its willow trees. Until August 6th, it had hardly been touched by the bombing. Now, Hiroshima lay in ruins. Nearly 80,000 civilians were killed by the blast of the bomb. Another 100,000 were horribly burned. And future generations were threatened by the nuclear fallout. Yet, there was no word of surrender from Tokyo. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. Finally, on August 10th, the Emperor informed the Allies that Japan wanted peace. It had taken 2 atomic bombs to force this decision. On September 2nd, 1945, the formal surrender was signed. The war was over. But the great questions remained. Would Japan have surrendered if the bomb had not been used? Would an invasion have been necessary? Was the price of peace too high? In October 1952, this uninhabited island, a dot in the vast Pacific Ocean, was the scene of the first hydrogen bomb test. If the bomb were successful, this island would disappear from the face of the earth. The destructive power of the hydrogen bomb makes the bombs dropped in Japan seem antique and inefficient. Yet, since 1945, men have fought wars all over the globe and have refrained from using nuclear weapons. In 1914, the British novelist H.G. Wells wrote that nations would not recognize the impossibility of war until they had seen the effects of an atomic explosion. In 1945, Harry Truman said that using the atomic bomb would save lives. Was he right or tragically wrong?